Hey, welcome back to the channel. It's Friday, but I have the day off and I was going to go fishing this morning, but it's really windy. I don't think I would have fared very well. And also I received something in the mail today that requires my attention, and I'll show you what that is. Here's the box for it. But basically I got the rudder kit for my Bonafide SS127, and I'm going to install that this morning on my SS127, and I'm going to try to document that experience on video, and hopefully it goes smoothly. Bonafide's got their own video where they go through the steps, and I might even have to refer to that, but this is going to be my version of it and my experience, along with all the frustrations and things that may go along with it. I hope there are none. But real quick, here are a few of the things that you're going to need. You're going to need the actual rudder kit, obviously, and there are three components to that. There's the actual rudder assembly itself, the lift and lower line kit, the steering assembly, and the blade keeper assembly. Additionally, you're going to need all this other stuff that's not included in the kit. That includes a drill, a 1/8 inch drill bit, a 3/16 inch drill bit, a lighter, a vice grip or needle nose, Phillips screwdriver, tape, knife or scissors, a 3/8 inch wrench or socket and ratchet, a 5/32 inch hex key, some marine silicone, and some dry silicone lubricant, which I don't have, so I will either run out and pick that up or find some sort of substitute. But you're going to need all that stuff. Oh, and here are a few other things that might come in handy that aren't mentioned in the install instructions. And one other thing that I wanted to mention to you is that before I start this installation, I removed the little safety flag that I tie onto the back handle when I haul the thing, and I also took off the flex wings that were on there. These were the beta version, and they were starting to get pretty worn, especially the starboard ones for you Navy types. That thing was getting really tired, worn out, so it was time for those things to go anyway. So my hope is that once I get this rudder kit installed, it'll kind of negate the need for those anyway. Without further ado, let me get my tripod set up and we'll start the install. Alright, the first stage in the installation is the knob rest installation and the lift and lower line routing. And the first part of that stage is to install the knob rests, and they're going to go on a part of the kayak that's just right in front of where the seat is. And let me kind of zoom in on that area. They're basically going to mount right here from this section right there, and I'm going to read the step to you and then I'll go over there and do it. You're going to place the knob rest just in front of the seat and mark one of the screw holes for drilling, and then you're going to drill that out with a 1/8 inch drill bit and probably the top hole, and then you're going to attach it with one of the screws that's in that part of the kit, and then you'll drill the hole and then tighten it up on the bottom. So stand by while I do that. Okay, so now that I've got the knob rest on there, the next step is to drill a hole for the lift and lower lining. And you're going to use that 3/16 inch drill bit for that. And let me see if I can get the other one and show you where the screw hole is for that. There we go. So you can see it's that little hole right there. So let me get my 3/16 inch drill bit out. All right, and now we're going to repeat all that for the other side of the boat. Okay, the next step takes place in the rear of the boat, so I'm going to take you back there. Hopefully you can see that okay. And we're going to take a piece called the line guide and we're going to mark it in the appropriate place and then drill a couple of holes to mount it. And according to what I'm seeing on the picture, I believe the correct place for that is right here. And a couple of these holes are going to have lines coming through them, and then the other one's going to actually have a screw to hold it in place. Alright, I'm going to drill my little center mounting hole there with a 1/8 inch drill bit. And attach it with one of my screws. And then for the next step, I've got to drill the holes for the lift and lower lines in those remaining spots using the 3/16 inch drill bit. Mission accomplished. And now I need to remove the rear access cover using the old Phillips screwdriver. Alright, and the next step says to feed the lift lower lines through holes in the rear of the boat through the line guide. Make sure to install the lines with the bungee end closest to the rear of the boat. Okay, so I just had to go back and refer to the Bonafide video because the next step in the instructions didn't make much sense to me. It says make sure to install the lines with the bungee end closest to the rear of the boat. And I'm looking at this thing, and the bungee that's on this thing is right in the middle of it, so it doesn't make much sense to say install it closest to the rear end of the boat. But I'm going to do what the guy did in the Bonafide video, and I will say that he did a step before this one, but I'm going to do it according to the written directions here. So I'm having a hard time feeding this thing through that hole, so I'm going to go ahead and melt the tip of it a little bit. There we go. And now I've got to do the other one. And it tells me to tie a knot in the end of these so they don't pull back through the hole, which sounds reasonable. Alright, we are back up at the front end of the boat where I mounted the knob rests, and the next step is to feed the provided spectra cord through the knob rest hole to the rear of the boat. And it's basically like fish tape, and so we're going to send that back there and tie the or tape the lift lower line to the end of that and then pull it back through. And it recommends straightening that cord before you put it into the hull, so it'll make it easier to make its way back there to the rear end of the boat. And I wanted to tell you that based on what I see in the kit here, I am going to assume that this Spectra cord is also what is going to end up being my rudder cable. So be careful not to damage it. Alright, now let me go back there and see if I can find it. Alright, so I got the cable that came through from the front end, and now I'm going to take the end of the lift lower line and I'm going to tape it. I'm going to overlap it with that Spectra cable and tape it together and then pull it back through. Alright, let's go pull it through. Alright, got it. And then we'll tie a knot in the end of this to keep it from pulling back through. Alright, and now we're going to repeat all that for the other side of the boat. Alright, the next major stage of the installation is called the steering tube installation and the steering cord routing. And in this section you will be routing the steering cord protective tube through the hull and feeding the steering cord through it. And the first step is to use a 3/16 inch drill bit and drill a hole at the end of the foot brace track towards the seat on both sides of the boat. Drill in the middle of the flat surface. So I gotta see if I can figure out where that is. They've got a little picture here, but still not that apparent to me, but I'll see if I can figure it out. So stand by. Okay, so watching Bonafide's video actually made it pretty clear where to drill this 3/16 inch hole. And I'm zooming in on the flat spot where that is. And I believe what they want you to do is to drill that hole right there. So that's what I'm going to do. And the other side as well. And then they want you to drill a couple of holes on the rear of the boat, so I'm taking you back there. Alright, and they make a point in the directions not to drill through these threaded inserts that are back here, and I think these are for a power pole kit or something. So I will be careful not to do that. And they do have some little indentations right here that kind of tell you where they want you to drill. So that's handy. Alright, so I got those two holes drilled, and the next step is to feed the steering tube through the hole that we drilled up there near the foot brace. So let me take you back up there. Alright, so I'm feeding this through there, and the directions say to leave 5 or 6 inches to make sure it doesn't pull all the way through there for the next step. Alright, Alright, that looks pretty good. Alright, and the next step was to reach into the front hatch and grab the other end of that, which I did, and you can see it hanging out there right there. Alright, and then the next step says to take the end of that tube and tape it to something heavy like a wrench. And then I think you're going to toss it to the back of the boat and retrieve it through the rear access hole. Hang on while I get all that done. Okay, so I got it through there, but truth in advertising here, I had to get my wife out here to help me, and I had to pick up the front end and kind of shake it down here, but you do what you got to do, right? So let's see. The next step is to retrieve the heavy object and steering tube through the rear hatch. Did that. And we're going to remove the heavy object. And then we're going to feed the tube through that hole that I drilled earlier. There we go. Okay, now this next part, when I was watching it on Bonafide's video, I'm like, well, that might get a little tricky, but we'll see how it goes. But they want you to stick a 1/8 inch drill bit down the end of this tube to kind of keep it from collapsing on itself. And then they want you to heat it up with a lighter until it starts to smoke, and then just kind of keep doing that until the end of that rubber just kind of, you know, mushrooms down a little bit. It's going to keep it from pulling back through that hole. I don't want to get melted plastic on my hand. Okay, so I think I got some pretty good mushrooming going on the end there. Hopefully that's enough to keep it from pulling back through. Alright, and the next step is to take a little silicone and dab it around the end. And I'm going to put a little bit down there around the hole too. And then pull that tube down until it's flush and clean up the excess. There we go. And now I got to repeat all that for the other side. Alright, the next step says to pull slack in the steering tube through the hole at the end of the foot brace, and then once the tube is taut, stretch the tube an additional inch and use vice grip pliers to hold the tube in place. Alternatively, a pair of needle nose pliers can be taped shut to hold the tube in place. Alright, but I have vice grips, so we're going to use those. Let me pull all the slack out of there. Okay, that seems pretty tight, so I'm going to pull another inch and clamp it down. Alright, so one thing that the written instructions don't tell you to do, although it is indicated in the photograph, is that once you pull that extra inch or so out with the vice grips, you're going to go ahead and cut the tube. And then you're going to take your 1/8 inch drill bit and do the old lighter trick to it again. Okay, and then once that cools, again add a little marine grade silicone around the edges, and then you're going to release the vice grips and it should pull that back snug. Okay, and then repeat all that for the other side. Okay, and then the next step is to route the steering cord through the tube to the rear of the boat. Alright, I see it coming out back there. And I will repeat that for the other side. Alright y'all, I gotta tell you, that last step was not an easy step for me. It has probably taken me an hour plus to get that one knocked out. And I'm going to tell you why. That step where you take the tube and tape it to something heavy and then shoot it down toward the back of the boat, that worked really great on the port side. But on the starboard side, once I got the tube, you know, heated and mushroomed down and all that, and then tried to run the steering cord through the tube, it was meeting some resistance. So there was obviously something keeping me from getting that cord all the way through there. And so what I ended up having to do was cut one of the melted ends off of the tube and pull it all back through there. And it actually had a knot in it from when I threw it back there, taped to a wrench. Kind of an overhand knot got caught up in it, and I had to untie that thing. Luckily, I still had enough of that tube left. I hadn't stretched it so tight that I couldn't, you know, re-mushroom the ends of it and get it back in there the way it should be. So, moving on, the next big step is to install the foot brace steering reel, and that's going to include putting the cords on there. So I've got you focused on the back end of one of the foot braces. And it tells me to clean the foot brace tracks, which I'll brush those off in a minute. And then once cleaned, apply a dry silicone lubricant spray to the tracks. Well, I don't have any of that. I'll have to get some of that later. And I will do that. But first step after that is to route the steering cord through the hole in the foot brace. One thing you do want to be mindful of here is don't have the foot braces, you know, in the locked mode, but rather have them open so that they can slide back and forth. Okay, so let me see if I can figure out how I'm supposed to route this cord through there. Okay, well there's a hole already there, so that seems pretty straightforward. And that hole is right there. I can get it through there. There we go. Alright, and then it tells me to route the steering cord through the hole in the steering reel leg. Alright, I want to show you something because it wasn't obvious to me from the printed instructions. But you've got to take your steering cord after you run it through the hole in the pedal, and you've also got to run it through this long hole here through the steering cord reel, or whatever they're calling this piece, the steering reel. And also you got to run it through this little hole right here and then tie an overhand knot. They don't spell that out really well in the written instructions. They do a better job on the Bonafide's video. Tie your overhand knot, pull that through, and then attach it with the screws. I had a comment on the Bonafide Owners Group Facebook page. I mentioned that I might shoot a video on this install, and somebody said that at this stage they discovered that the screws were too long, and they are correct. They are. I'm going to use them anyway, but you can get them tightened down so far and then no further. But as long as it holds it on there, I'm going to see if I can make it work. Alright, next step, we are actually down to installing the rudder. and attaching the lift and lower lines. And so we're going to take our rudder assembly, and we got to take the nut and the bushing off there. And we're going to place the rudder assembly with the 1032 bolt passing through the pivot hole at the stern of the boat. Makes sense to me. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that that's probably like that somehow. Alright, and then the next step says to place the plastic bushing onto the bolt shank with the flat washer side pointing towards the nut. So that tells me, like that, it's going to go pointing up like that, so that the flat side is toward the nut. Okay, I've got that threaded on there a little bit. And we're going to tighten that using a 3/8 inch wrench or socket and the 5/32 hex key. Alright, got no play, but it's also not difficult to turn. Okay, choose either the left or the right side lift lower line to be your rudder lift line. Let's see, do I have a preference? I think I'm going to make the lift line. Wrap this line under the front of the rudder assembly. Alright, so now that we've got our rudder on there and it moves pretty freely, we're going to run the lift line. And I'm going to use the left one for that. And you're going to start off by running the line up underneath this little gap and up through this little hole on the front of the rudder. And you're going to go over the blade pivot point, and then on what I'm going to call like the bottom side of the rudder, as you're looking at it, you're going to run it through this little round hole here, tie an overhand knot in the end of it, and then just run that whole line with the knot in the end of it into that hole right there. I think they call it the oblong hole, and then and basically just pull that tight. So there's the lift line. All right. So now we're going to rig up our lower line. And just like we did before, we're going to run that underneath, but instead of going over the pivot point, we're going to go under the pivot point. Through the round hole, tie the overhand knot, and then run it through the notch and pull it tight. Okay. So lift and lower. Okay. That brings us to our next section, tying the steering cord. So in this section we'll be attaching the steering cord to the rudder and trimming it to length. So we're going to unlock the foot pegs and push them all the way forward toward the bow. And you guys can watch me do that from here. Okay, so the next stage is tying the steering cord onto the rudder, and they illustrate a slip knot here that you're supposed to use for it, and rather than trying to get a close-up of me tying that knot, I'll just take a picture of their guide here and I'll put it in the video so you can see what I'm seeing. But it seems pretty straightforward. We're just going to tie both of these steering cords to these little holes here on either side of the rudder. Okay, so I got those tied and cut, and I'm just going to burn the ends off. So they don't fray. In this section, we'll be installing the lift and lower knobs, tensioning the lift and lower lines, and testing the functionality of the rudder. For this portion of the installation, we will need to elevate the rear of the kayak high enough to clear the rudder blade when deployed. I already got that since it's on sawhorses. And it has a caution in here when lifting and lowering the rudder blade. Make sure the area is clear, as the blade will strike anything in its path with a great deal of force, probably things like your noggin. Alright, so we're going to pull the line, chosen to be the rudder lift line, until the cable is fully lifted. Okay, now let me bring you guys back up there so you can see what I'm doing. It says thread a lift and lower knob onto the lift line so that it's threaded through. Pull the lift line until it is taut, but do not pull any tension in the bungee attached to it. Pinch the lift line at the point it exits the knob. Pull the line out and tie a knot about 1 inch below that point. So about right here. Says you might find it helpful to use vice grip pliers to hold that in place, but that seemed to do okay for me. At this time, do not cinch the knot down or trim the line, as you may need to adjust its length. Now it says pull the line chosen to be the rudder lower line until the blade is fully deployed. That to be on the other side. Just turn you around right here. Okay. Release the lower line and let it go slack. Okay. And we're going to thread another knob onto this side. All right, pull the lower line until it is taut, but do not put any tension in the bungee attached to it. Okay. Pinch the lower line at the point it exits the knob. Right there. Pull the line out and tie a knot 1 inch below it. Should be about right there. At this time, do not cinch the knot down or trim the line, as you may need to adjust the length. All right, pull the lift line and make sure the blade can lift fully. All right, so it says pull the lift line and make sure the blade can lift fully. It does. If the blade does not lift fully, you have too much tension in the lower line, and the knot needs to be moved up the line. Looks like we're good. Pull the lower line and make sure the blade can fully deploy. It does. If the blade does not deploy fully, you have too much tension in the lift line, and the knot needs to be moved up the line. But I think we're good. Alright, so I've got the cords where I want them, so I'm going to cut those off and bring the ends closer to the knob.
I'll leave a little bit on there just in case.
Okay, so the only pieces I think I have left to do, there's no directions for these, but just based on what I can figure out, I think I need to pull this rudder cord through and wrap it around this little knob here. And eventually that thing is spring loaded and you can tighten it based on where you want to put the pedals. But I'm 5'10", and I already know that I can barely reach these things, even with the pedals all the way aft. So I'm going to go ahead and position them there and take a few turns on this cord. If I work the pedals in both directions, I get full throw with the rudder. Oh, one thing I forgot was the blade keeper. They've got a little thing you can drill some holes in to hold the blade down, you know, for transport or whatever. But I don't usually travel with mine with anything in the tank well, so I'm simply going to just put the little hook they provided onto the tank well bungee and slip it over the top, and then it just goes into one of those notches and it keeps that secure for when you're heading down the road. Alright, so that is it. I hope this installation is helpful for some of you. I'm going to be honest with you, it took me several hours. You know, I think now that I've done one, I could probably knock it out in an hour or two. But I did have some technical difficulties along the way. Some of them I talked to you about, other ones I will leave on the cutting room floor. But it wasn't too bad. It wasn't as difficult as I had anticipated. And I'm going to take it out on the water tomorrow and give it a shot and see if it helps. I kind of will be glad to have those flex wings off there. One of them was starting to wear out and it was kind of dragging me and actually making the kayak turn. You know, quite the opposite of what they were designed for. So I hope this rudder goes above and beyond the fix that those flex wings provided for us. So thanks for watching. I hope that was helpful for you, and we'll see you out there on the water.